unmute yourselves if you'd like to, and put on your cameras. Hi, Julie and Ken. There's his husband and wife. They won't show themselves and they won't speak, but they're always here. They chat, tell me in their chat they're here. Can't wait to see you one of these times. But whatever. Hi, Miriam.
Hi, Susan. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Oh, we have some people coming in. Hi, Lynn. You're muted if you don't know. Okay. We'll wait another minute or two. We're going to be looking at the Holiness Code, Leviticus 19, which is this week's Torah portion, which is one of my favorites, actually. Love it, but we'll wait a minute or two to see if people are gonna, any more people gonna join us. You might want to unmute yourselves, turn on your videos. If you can, or not. Hi, Diane.
Hi, Rabbi Nanus.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Okay. All right, well, it's 12:02. We'll give it another minute. More people are slowly clicking on. By the way, everyone, tonight is going to be a fantastic Shabbat service. It's the Kolenu service with Cantor Lisa Peacock and Rabbi Joel Nickerson, but they pre-recorded it and they have all kinds of musicians interspersed, and it's been hours creating this service. So it's beautiful and I suggest it. I'm definitely going to watch it. It looks really great. So we're trying to experiment with all kinds of, services and trying to make it, just constantly trying to up our game, basically. So I highly recommend.
Just as a little note, we tried to make it easier for people to see it.
Yeah.
So we have a new page, and in today's little Wilshire Daily, there's a nice big button. Just click Watch Services, and you're in great shape.
Right. Thank you. That's the voice of Don Levy, our communications director, who makes all of these Zoom things happen. So, all right, we're going to begin. And first of all, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. And I want to start with a blessing. Studying Torah is always a blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok divrei Torah, to be engaged in the study of Torah. So this week's Torah portion is called Kedoshim, which means holy, and it's right in the middle of the book of Leviticus. Now, the book of Leviticus is basically from the word Levite. It's kind of a instruction book, mainly for the Levites and the priests, of how to do all the sacrifices, all of the details, the minutia of the sacrifices in the temple. And suddenly in the middle of this is this sort of whole separate direction of ethical and moral commandments right in the middle of this. So biblical scholars believe that this is a whole separate group of writings by different writers. Now, if you're a traditional Jew, you believe that the whole Torah was given, by God at Sinai, or it was written, by Moses. But contemporary scholars have always said that there are 4 separate authors of different parts of the Torah that were ultimately put together in about the 4th century BCE. Or 5th century, 3rd century BC, in the 400s. And the 4 writers are known as the J, And any text that has the Yahweh, the J, the Adonai that we call the Yud He Vav He, was that writer. The E, where Elohim, anywhere where it says Elohim, that's the E writer. The D, which they say is the writer, a whole different writer who wrote the book of Deuteronomy, which was written several hundred years later, and it's beautiful writing. The book of Deuteronomy has some beautiful writing, and they believe the Deuteronomist, they call him the Deuteronomist, or some people say it was a school of Deuteronomists, also wrote the book of Joshua, the book of Judges, and the book of Samuels, and the book of Kings. So they believe that, though, not sure about Kings, but for sure through Samuel, which is the stories of King David and King Saul. So the Deuteronomists wrote that. And then the last one, the fourth, is the priests. The priestly section, which we see in the book of Leviticus, is the strongest. But then they say they believe there was this fifth set of writers, the H, the Holiness Code writers, because it was so separate from everything else written, a different style, concerned with ethical behavior in a very strong way. And I sometimes imagine that, you know, when they were compiling this handbook for priests, basically in the priestly instructions, the normal person is kind of like you're a bystander. You bring your sacrifice and you give it to the Levites who prepare it, and then the priests sacrifice it. You do eat some of it. That's part of the ritual, that you eat some of it. But basically, it's kind of like I've sacrificed, I've done the penance sacrifice, the gratitude sacrifice, I've expressed myself to God through sacrifice. And it seems like this group of priests said, well, there needs to be more. People need to be more accountable. They need to actually have ethical and moral behavior and requirements of them. It's not enough just to give a sacrifice to God. So this whole section is about different ethical behavior. And the first thing it's, and chapter 19, it's several chapters, and some of it deals with sexual morality and other kinds of morality, but we're dealing with the actual behavioral one, which is the most famous one. And the first thing I want to ask you, it says, it begins with, and I gave you the script, or the text. See, I'm still a screenwriter in my head. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, speak to the whole Israelite community and say to them, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. So the first question I want to ask you is, what do you think holy means? What is holiness? What do we mean by holiness? The word in Hebrew is kadosh. And I just, as an aside, the kiddush, you know, the prayer of the wine comes from that root. The kaddish, the prayer that we say for the dead, comes from that word. So the kedusha, which is a special holy section of the prayers, is from that word. So what do you think kadosh or kodesh means? What does holy mean? And there, it's your opinion. I mean, there's no wrong answer. So Valerie. You're muted. You're muted. Unmute yourself. Okay.
Say, probably in the image of God.
In the image of God. Okay. Barbara, were you going to say something similar?
Similar, I was going to say on a higher level.
On a higher level. Okay. Merle?
High ethical standards,
A higher
high
ethical.
ethical behavior.
Okay. Anything else? What's interesting is one of the rabbis, the commentaries say to be holy is to be different or set aside from the ordinary, not the mundane, the not everyday. I mean, we in Hebrew, the opposite of kadosh is chol, which means everyday, mundane. So that is one of the first, I mean, there are multiple definitions and you're all right. That's one of them. Another one is to partake in some measure of the special qualities of God, which is what we said, to be like God, and the highest level of human behavior. And holiness also is when you choose to act from your higher level, as opposed, you have freedom to do anything you want and you choose to go to the highest level. And but Martin Buber So Martin Buber, his whole thing was that God exists in relationships, in the I-thou relationship, that you see others as equal to yourself, which comes to the great commandment at the end of this holiness code. But he says, holiness is when human beings recognize the divinity, the latent divinity of other people, just like God recognizes it in us. So when we see we see people as like images of the God or divine or having value, that's holiness. And also, the rabbis say that we don't just make ourselves holy, we can make objects holy. And for sure in Judaism, we make time holy. You know, we make Shabbat holy, we make our holidays holy, we sanctify them, we raise them up, we separate them, and we use them to inspire us to reach our highest selves. So the second thing that's very interesting about this very first sentence, it says, speak to the whole Israelite community and say to them, speak to the whole Israelite community. What does that imply? And you shall be holy. So what does that imply about who can be holy? Merle.
Will?
That we're speaking to everyone, all of the Jewish community, not just Israel, but everybody involved.
Yes, and also, this is a whole book or section about how elevated the priests are and the Levites and how special and how separate. And they have all of this holy behavior. And now, according to Rabbi Sachs, the former chief rabbi, Lord Rabbi Sachs of London, he says, this is the only time where God says it's men, women, children, poor, rich, whatever. Every human being has the potential to be holy. You must be holy. You should be holy. He says the democratization of holiness, this sentence. Certainly in ancient times, you know, kings, pharaohs, lords, you know, gods, priests, whatever, were way above the common human being. And in this simple phrase, the whole Israelite community, we're saying no. Even the most simple person can be holy. And we know the Baal Shem Tov took that to a whole other level about, you know, how the simple human being can actually be more holy than the great scholar by doing good deeds, by having a heart and good heart and connecting to God. And you know that famous story about the whistling on Yom Kippur. Does anybody not know that story about the whistling? The Baal Shem Tov was the head of the Hasidic movement, was praying for his community on Yom Kippur. And they say his soul was so elevated that he could connect to the heights and he could see that the prayers were not being accepted. And at that time, a poor shepherd came into the back and he was standing there and he couldn't read and he wanted to connect with God. And he said, God, I don't know how to read. All I can do is whistle a beautiful tune. In some stories he's whistling, some stories he plays a shepherd's flute, but it's a very simple, all he can do is what he can do. And he starts to whistle. And the people turn around and start yelling at him, be quiet, we're trying to pray. And the Baal Shem Tov says, no, just a minute. This simple whistling from the soul opened the gates and allowed all of our prayers to be accepted because it was so pure. So the idea that the simple, the poor, has inherent holiness and sincerity is taken to that level in the Hasidic teachings, but here we get the very beginning of it. So what's interesting is that this one chapter in Leviticus 19 mixes, sorry, I don't know why I'm very dry, mixes a few rituals within the main ethical behavior. And I'm going to also read you some commentaries as well. But the first one is, you shall fear your mother and your father and keep my Shabbats, keep my Sabbaths. Why do you think they said, I mean, the translation is revere, but really it's be in awe of your mother and your father. And if you remember the 10 Commandments in the book of Exodus, It's honor your father and your mother. And here it's revere or be in awe or fear your mother and your father. So they asked about that. Why do you think that is reversed? And I'm curious if anybody has any opinions. Why you think that, first of all, they did the mother first, and why they changed it to fear or hold in awe your mother and your father. And if you know, or you have, Susan, you're on a mute though.
Have to have these earphones now, but normally you are in awe of your father, and the mother is the comforting and the one who gives succor. So this time they're trying to, I think, have those emotions apply to the, well, certainly to the mother, but then they are they're making it, those emotions available or to both parents.
Exactly. That's what the rabbis say, that it's very easy to be in awe of your father and love your mother, but they want you to also love your father and be in awe of your mother and respect your mother and hold her in the same esteem. And then right after that is keep my Shabbat. So honoring parents and Shabbat, as we know, are right in the center of the 10 commandments. It's the 4th and the 5th commandment. And those are, even though they are human behaviors, the rabbis divide the 10 commandments into the first 5 being between man and humans and God, and the second 5 between humans and each other. And the 4th commandment is honor your parents, and the 5th commandment is keep my Shabbat. So the implication is when we do these things, we are actually being holy both in this realm and in the heavenly realm at the same time, that they cross the barrier between the two, even though it's behavior, because the other ones in the first 5 are, you know, don't have any other gods, don't take my name in vain. They're easy to understand, they're about God, but these sort of cross the spheres between human, go into the heavens and into the everyday world by having this behavior. And then the next one is do not turn to idols or make molten gods for yourself. Well, okay, these are kind of like, so you could say, is this the 10 commandments reviewed? And scholars say, no, this was written separately, but obviously these were such strong values that they were repeated unbeknownst to each other. And then it does this thing where it talks about these sacrifices. So suddenly you think, okay, we're going into sacrifices now. And it talks about when you give it a sacrifice of well-being, that you have to eat it in 3 days. But the rabbis say it's not that. You're going to have too much. You should be feeding the poor with it. You should be taking this extra sacrifice of well-being. So I love that it's well-being because it means I'm doing well. I'm sacrificing, but if I'm doing well, I need to be feeding the poor and taking care of the less fortunate. And I think, you know, we could think of it's something that can apply to today. When I'm doing well and I'm having gratitude, how can I express that gratitude besides saying, oh my God, I'm so lucky. Oh, lucky me. Thank you. Thank you. This sort of implies the way you express gratitude when you're in a place of well-being is you help the less fortunate, you help the poor and whatever. And there's so many stories now of people helping the families of the caregivers and the medical workers and all of those people all over the city. So it's so interesting what's happening to us as a people. Our priorities and values are really being readjusted or refocused, and a lot of it for the good, I would say. And let's just hope that they remain that way, because we've really had to, you know, the essence of the Shema is that we're all one, and we're realizing that we all affect each other and we're all one. Okay, so now it goes to like right after that, and that's why the rabbis say, okay, how do we know that the sacrifices should be, we're thinking about the poor? Because there's this very, very famous commandment that you don't hear in any other culture. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edges of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall not pick your vineyard bare. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I am the Lord your God. So I'm curious, why do you think the commandment is not collect it and give it? I mean, wouldn't that be easier? You harvest everything and then you take it and you give it. It doesn't say that. It says leave some so they can come and get it. So what do you think what's the value in that, do you think? Why would that be the commandment as opposed to just giving it yourself? Lynn.
Because you want to preserve their dignity,
Right.
not make them have to be recipients, but rather active in collecting their own food.
Exactly. It's like it's like they are working, they are going out and in some way doing some work as opposed to just having a handout. Yes, Miriam.
And it reminds us of the story of Ruth, where
That's right.
Boaz even says to his people, his work for him, do not embarrass and do not look upon the reapers, because we leave the ends of our field, we leave the payot of our sadeh, especially for the poor. And so he's actually mandated and commanded to do that. I guess it's right from here.
Yes, totally from here. I wonder if Maimonides, oh yes, Talia, did you want to say something?
Yeah, it also would be that there's no grandiosity about it. It doesn't elevate someone by giving. They just give because it's the right thing to do, as opposed to getting like their name on the plaque, shall we say.
Yeah, they may not even be there. They may not even be there. They just leave their field open and people know they can go in, which I was going to say, perhaps, because I don't know if this is true, Maimonides, which is in, he lived in the 12th century, gave a list of the different stages of giving tzedakah, of giving charity. And the lowest is you give it to the person and they see you. That's the lowest level. Like you say, here, this is from me. That's considered the lowest level. And then it goes to like, you give it and they don't see you. They see you, but you don't see them. Neither one of them, you see each other. And the highest level is giving a person a job, so they don't have to get charity. And that is considered the highest form of tzedakah, of giving, is to give person employment. So I'm wondering if Maimonides looked at this and came up with his whole hierarchy of tzedakah from this verse. And then he says, you shall not steal, and you shall not deal deceitfully or falsely with one another. So I think the rabbis are very much about why do they pair certain of these together. And they talk about, hold on a minute.
The night and
They talk about that stealing deceit is a kind of theft. When you cheat someone, even if it's lying to them or cheating on them, it's a kind of theft. It's not necessarily a material theft, but it's a spiritual or an emotional theft. So they put those two together. And I think, I'm sorry, Diane, I didn't hear you. Okay. That, don't forget, these are supposed to be how you can be holy. So these are like symbols of holiness. It's not telling you to do things. Most of them are, don't do these things. Don't do these things. Don't hurt people in different ways. That's how you manifest holiness in the world, which again, kind of connects with Hillel saying, do not do unto others what you wouldn't have them do to you. It's interesting. It's refraining from bad behavior makes you holy. Talia.
There was a study that showed if you put up signs that say, don't step on the grass, don't step on the grass, people still stepped on the grass, like at universities, But when they changed the sign to say, please use the sidewalk, people use the sidewalk. So I find that really interesting that it would be all the
Don't. This don't stuff. I do too, but I have a theory. If you've been in my other classes, you know that they only say don't do things that people are doing, that people are really doing a lot of. Otherwise, why say it? And I always go back to the story, you may have heard it or not, about in Victorian England, homosexuality was illegal, but lesbianism wasn't. And they asked Queen Victoria, why is homosexuality illegal, but lesbianism isn't? And she said, well, there's no such thing as lesbianism in her mind. So basically, they don't tell you not to do something if it doesn't exist or nobody is doing it. So when you look at these things, and you can look at the prophets too, the things they're telling you to stop doing or you shouldn't be doing are things that are, it's not like a few people, a lot of people, which, some of them are due, like reap the harvest of your land and leave things. That's a positive. Please leave that. You're right. But this don't steal and don't deal deceitfully. Obviously, people were doing it. And then it says, you shall not swear falsely by my name, profaning the name of your Lord. So what do you think that means to swear falsely? What does that mean, do you think? It's really about, I guess people would use, we know that today, this is so relevant, using the name of God to justify bad behavior or anything you want to do, saying, well, it's God's will, or God told me to do this, or I know this is what God wants. So that obviously was a big concern, that people could, use God to justify their behavior and act morally or badly. Okay, so now here's the next one. You shall not defraud your fellow. You shall not commit robbery. This is all one. The wages of a laborer shall not remain with you until morning. They're all three kinds of fraud or theft: robbery, theft, defraud. Okay, this idea of not keeping your wages until morning has stayed with me my whole life. I learned that, I think as a kid or something, that when I have a day laborer or a cleaning lady or somebody, I will never say, right, I'll pay you next week, or I don't have it today, or, oh, I didn't go to the bank, or whatever. I will go to the bank no matter what, because.
Right, I've got the three names. Yeah.
Because why? Who's speaking? Anne? Because they may need it today. They may not be able to eat until today. They need the food. So, that one, for some reason, I've had people say, it's okay. I go, no, I'm going to go to the bank. No. I'm not saying I'm a good person. I think it's because I learned it, and I'm so conscious of it. And maybe I wouldn't do it if I didn't know about this mitzvah here. So that is another one.
Susan?
Yes.
I think it's important that they're linked, all three of these. Committing robbery in a way is depriving the worker of his honest wages. So you're holding them and you're earning interest or whatever, and not allowing the laborer to earn the interest. I think they're all related. And it's defrauding them because they expected to get paid. So I think that could be one of the reasons too why it's staying so.
I agree with you. They're all the same. Okay, now this is a really interesting one. Out of the blue, you shall not insult the deaf or place a stumbling block before the blind. So the rabbis expand that. What do you think that means, and why? Why was that such a concern, Merle?
Don't make them any more handicapped than they already are.
Right. So one thing is that we're like talking about respecting the handicapped. Absolutely. And being conscious of them. And I think it's pretty amazing in this 2,500 or 3,000-year-old code of law that there was a concern for handicapped people, when we know in most societies they killed them They exposed the child and let them die if there was any kind of handicap. But the rabbis say it's even deeper than that. Insulting the deaf, they said also you shouldn't insult the deaf. I thought this was interesting because if you yell at them, you insult them and they don't hear you, then you get angry and you start screaming at them and you could become abusive. So you shouldn't start even being angry at deaf people because they can't help it. And they talk about a stumbling block in front of the blind also being tempting people who have weaknesses or doing things for people who have disabilities, mental or emotional disabilities, putting stumbling blocks, and it could even go into bullying of people who are weaker than yourself. So it's a much broader understanding of that.
Susan, I would,
Miriam.
I've heard it also explained, it goes so far, not to put a stumbling block, as for the dealer in a store when he's weighing something for the customer, not to put his thumb on the scale to make it seem larger. That's also putting a stumbling block in front of the blind.
Yes.
Or any business dealings the same way.
Yes.
Put a stumbling block.
I think, you know, when a blind person is a person who doesn't have the information, and we know there are people who can be very slick and manipulate things or change things around, and you don't really even know, what somebody who's naive or whatever. So in that respect, you're absolutely right.
Susan, I've also heard it similarly by a financial advisor, putting that into the business realm, that they'll be advising the client who doesn't know stocks and bonds or whatever, to go in to the fields that the financial advisor might profit from. So I've heard it used in business too.
Yes. And in fact, I think I mentioned this before. The first question that you're asked when you die, according to the Talmud, when you go up to heaven, is, were you honest in your business practices? That's the very first question that the angels ask you, according to the Midrash and the stories. Were you honest in your business practices? So that was apparently a problem, a challenge for people. So because, to be asked that meant that it was, it wasn't so common. It wasn't so common. So you're right. The stumbling block before the blind can be anything where we're taking advantage of a person's ignorance, naivete, when they don't know about it. And again, this is considered holiness. It's unbelievable that this is what the Torah means when they say you're going to be a holy, elevated human being. Yes, who?
I would add that it's not even going so far. It's Valerie. As to take advantage. It's you don't even, like in child rearing, I always use that phrase in child rearing. If you know your kid isn't capable of learning, don't put something in his way that he can't really do. Like if he has a short attention span, don't give him a project that requires a long attention span. So it's not even taking advantage, it's just allowing somebody to be their best when you know what their capabilities are.
So it's a pretty sensitive commandment for such an ancient time. Some of the Torah sometimes seems outdated, and some of it just seems so advanced in its thinking and the way that it's teaching us to look at the world and to shape our life view and shape our behavior. Okay, so now we talked about this in my last class on Wednesday, but it's about you should not render an unfair decision. Do not show favor or deference to the rich or to the poor, or deference to the rich. Judge your neighbor fairly. So it seems like in our country, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of, bias toward the powerful, or not our country, in the world, toward the powerful, and to be a just. And I think maybe this was applied to judges, but I think all of us sometimes judge people on some very superficial qualities or characteristics or things, you know, if they're wealthy, more beautiful, more successful, sometimes we judge them to have more value than other people who have less. So I think this is talking about valuing, again, this idea that we're all holy from the very first sentence teaches us here that we're all supposed to be judged on our own merit, not on our birth, not on, you know, on our own achievement and our own merit. Okay. Do not deal basely with your countrymen. Do not stand on the blood of your fellow. I am the Lord. So we talked about that last time also. This is all in this holiness code. You can't stand by and let injustice occur. You can't let violence occur. You can't let injustice occur. You have to speak out. And that's hard sometimes. And we talked about also where no one is a mensch, be a mensch. So it's this idea that, yes, somebody say something. Okay. The one that I find the most interesting is don't hate your brother, it says in your heart. Reprove your brother, but incur no guilt. Okay, they're telling you, this is so psychologically fascinating. What's the psychology? You shall not hate your brother in your heart, reprove your brother, but incur no guilt because of him. What is the psychology behind that, do you think?
Correct a wrong behavior. Stand up when you see wrongdoing on your fellow kinsmen, but don't do it out of hatred. Then there's the correlative that when you correct someone's behavior, you do so in a way that won't insult or demean the wrongdoer.
Yes, but I agree with you. I think there's something deeper there. Don't hate your kinsman in your heart. Yeah, Barbara?
How about the idea of not holding a grudge? Not
Yes.
not hardening your heart.
I like that. You don't harden your heart, but it says, don't hold a grudge or don't hate the person. And then the next sentence is, reprove them. In other words, speak up. Don't walk around angry for 10 years and speak up. Psychologically, it's saying, you know, you're not supposed to just stew. You need to talk to the person. You need to tell them, I'm mad at you or I'm upset with you because you did this. And it's really bothering me. And that is hard. That is very hard to do. I have had challenges with that myself where you want to, it's called constructive conversation or this idea that you need to sit somebody down and tell them how they wronged you or hurt you. Who's speaking? Somebody? Anybody? I didn't hear you. Okay. So you need to psychologically, don't hold it in, speak up, but incur no guilt. Meaning exactly as Susan said, don't embarrass them. Don't do the terrible, terrible sin of humiliation, which is a big one in Judaism, to humiliate somebody. So but you need to speak up. So
Susan.
Yes, yes.
I was wondering if you just tell the person, like, I hear you and I understand where you're coming from, and I'm willing to think about it and get back to you with some sort of a decision, amicable decision we can make.
Well, who's saying that? Which person?
I am saying it to the person who's angry or I'm angry with that person, but I'm trying to tell the person, I hear you and I know what you're saying, and let me think about it and get back to you.
That's fine. That's fine. But okay, Miriam.
I think you touched on one of the most important parts of a relationship, any relationship, Susan. You said something so profound. You must speak up. I think that in today's world, how we phrase what we're going to say is as important as blurting it out. or as Anne's suggestion was good, I'll get back to you, that might not work for all relationships. I think this is where we, as very full of faults human beings, I'm looking for the word, we're also faulty. I think this is where we need help. Unless you know that you're going to be able to reach that person whom you have to speak out against or have to speak face to face, when you're confrontational, it might not be the way to go.
Right.
This is where every one of us need help.
Yes, I think, any other comments? Yes, Talia.
I've heard it stated in this way, where you can stand up for yourself without standing against others. So you can speak up for yourself, but not speak out against others. So maybe if that brother is doing something violent and it's not a conversation, there's a way to stop them from continuing the harm that they're doing either to you or someone else, but without killing them. Maybe that's it.
Okay.
That it became physical. So even verbal, it would be to be able to stand up for yourself without standing against others.
Sometimes, though, the reproving is not necessarily against you. Sometimes there's two things: is don't hate the person. In other words, don't hold a grudge. And sometimes you just have to let it go. Sometimes it's not about speaking up unless it's unbearable, but sometimes it's like an intervention. You're seeing a person self-destroying themselves, and you want to, we've seen those TV shows, intervention, where you want to sit down and say to someone, you're eating too much, you're drinking too much, your behavior, I love you, but I need to talk to you about something. The Torah is saying, you shouldn't be silent. It's kind of like a milder version of don't stand idly by while the blood.
Right.
That's
Right.
the one with the violence. But
Right.
they're saying some people need, I hate to use this word, but correcting or something, made aware. Are you aware that I think is a good way, Miriam, to sometimes bring things up. Are you aware that whatever that, or I wanted to talk to you. It's very hard to bring it up. And yet the Torah tells us, and maybe this is our support, I'm not wrong to bring it up. The Torah tells me to mention it, that it comes from this idea, am I my brother's keeper, or Kol Yisrael's Arevim Zeh Lazeh, or all Israel is responsible one for the other. Also, it says, the translation is kinsfolk, but the Hebrew is ach, your family member, your brother, even your brother. And or the suggestion being is sometimes it's easier to hate your family member in order to talk to them, but we have to find a way. So again, being holy is this very subtle psychological behavior that is not just in human relationships, being delicate, being sensitive, being supportive, and also not letting them get away with things at the same time. And then the next one is, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your countrymen. Well, your family, your fellows. How did the Torah legislate emotions? What do you think about that? This idea that they're telling you not to feel a certain way. They're telling you, the Torah is saying, don't take vengeance, okay, but don't even bear a grudge. Do you think that's reasonable or possible? Or what do you do about that? Do you think? Anybody have any opinions about that? And why? Why is bearing a grudge considered an important quality, an important thing to refrain from? Well, yes, Miriam?
When I think of bearing a grudge, which almost everybody does, knowing that they should not, I think of the harm it does to you. Perhaps this is implied in bearing a grudge, that you are suffering along with whatever that person did, and you feel so righteous and you feel So absolutely correct, bearing a grudge, that they should not have blah, 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 and they did this, and you, poor person, are bearing a grudge. But think of how it's diminishing
Right.
to bear that grudge, literally, what it's doing to your sense of self, because you're bearing that grudge.
Okay, Merle?
I think sometimes someone can hurt you so badly that you don't even know you're carrying a grudge. You don't know how, it's hard to give in and if you can't talk to the person sensibly, that it's very painful. And I'm not sure you always know that that's how you feel.
I think you're right. I think it's interesting. It's like, don't hate in your heart, don't bury a grudge. And then around that is, but speak up. In other words, express whatever it is, but don't take vengeance. And I think bearing a grudge, the reason it's the last one before the big commandment that Rabbi Akiva says is the most important commandment, which is love your neighbor as yourself, is that it's like in the 10 commandments, this is like a gateway commandment. If you bear a grudge and you let it stew, you may possibly take vengeance, hate people in your heart, deal basely with your countrymen, and stand by while their blood is shed. All of that from bearing a grudge. So bearing a grudge can lead to all this other worse behavior. So what do we do if we can't talk? We should talk about it if we can. Sometimes just talking about it, whether the person, agrees or not, just getting it out is enough. But is there anything else we can do for that, Susan?
Well, before we get to that, there was a comment by Rabbi Telushkin, who said, and that stays with me all the time, bearing a grudge is letting the person you dislike live rent-free in your brain.
Yes,
that's true. That's true.
So, I mean, that was a tailgating on Miriam's, but that was such a good statement, I thought, what it does to yourself.
That's right. They're living there because you're stewing and stewing. Yes, Talia.
And then also, you're obsessed with that as opposed to moving on with carrying out like God's work, like being of service or doing good things in the world. So it takes away from being in the moment and being able to participate in the world and to be of service to your fellows.
And also, interestingly, you're right. Right after that is love your fellow as yourself. Don't take vengeance. Don't bear a grudge. Love your fellow as yourself. So just think about that sequence. Does that suggest how you should love your fellow as yourself from that sequence? Think about it for a minute. So the rabbi suggests, just like you forgive yourself your faults, you say, okay, I did my best. Be as flexible or as soft with others. They did something wrong. Don't take revenge. Don't bear a grudge. Give them the same. It's a big thing in the Pirkei Avot to give someone the benefit of the doubt, to try to think the best of them. Right. And or if bearing a grudge is just as Susan said, a psychological obsession. You either let it go or you forgive them, or you take into account the situation. The love your neighbors, yourself is like, don't be so harsh on others. And right now we're so divided in this country on so many things. It's really hard to be forgiving and giving even, or to let go of things. So all of this stuff, again, I just have to say, is holy behavior. It's not just like be a good person or, no, that's very nice of you. It's like, this is considered in Judaism holiness, how to, as we said, be like God. So what are we saying about God, or the God that we want to believe in doesn't take vengeance, even though some parts of God in the early part of the Torah does take vengeance, but the prophets perceive God as totally different and isn't unfair and doesn't judge, judges in a fair way, and does reprove us, does tell us when we're doing wrong, but in a gentle way is what we're hoping for. I mean, certainly the Torah is just the first part of the Hebrew Bible, and you can see that the character of God evolves over the generations, and that the rabbis actually reinterpreted God, in rabbinic times also to reflect a less sort of ancient world God and more of what we consider the God of Judaism today. So the holiness code then goes into behavior of sexual behavior and some I think kosher things as well. But this to me is the core of what it means to be a Jew that's relevant to us today, is this holy behavior. So I want to ask you, of what we went through, do any of them particularly speak to you the most today? Any of these? Which ones speak to you the most? I'll just review them. Fear your mother and father and keep Shabbat. Don't have false gods. Don't leave, when you harvest, leave things for the stranger. Don't steal or be deceitful. Don't defraud your fellow or commit any kind of robbery. Don't keep wages overnight for the poor. Don't be unfair in your judgments. Don't stand by on the blood of your fellow. Don't hate. Speak up to reprove someone, but in a kind way. Don't have a grudge. Don't take revenge. Love your fellow as yourself. So which ones, or one or two, speak to you today? Because, depending where we're at, different things speak to us at different times in our lives. I remember reading Madame Bovary, and when I first read it, I felt so bad for Emma Bovary. And then when I read it when I was older, I thought she was an idiot. It was so interesting. The book had not changed, but I had changed. So I think the Torah also speaks differently, at different times. So does anyone have one? Lynn.
I think the part about not having false gods, that in recent days we've come to see who is essential, and it is not the movie star, and it's not the sports star, it's not the millionaire or the billionaire, it's the person who works in the grocery store.
I agree with you. That's beautiful. Or delivers things to our door, or even the mailman people who are going around and stuff. Absolutely. Oh, I love that. Thank you. Anyone else? Which one speaks to you, Merle?
I was just gonna say, I was raised in a home where we were taught all these values, and it was always expected that that's how I behaved. But in today's world, where people are so angry or make stupid comments where somebody's handicapped, or not, doesn't even matter what the handicap might be, or somebody has an illness that requires attention, that people are making comments that they think they're funny, but they're very hurtful. So when I see this, I really have a trouble with not having grudges against people that treat people the wrong way.
Have you ever spoken up?
Well, I finally did a few months ago. And I mean, and this person and I have a really good relationship, and we've had a good relationship for years. But when it happened, it was very hurtful, and I was pissed, and I had to vent about it wherever I could. And I give Arnie credit. He called the guy for me.
All right.
And said, do you have any clue what you did or what you said? But I see it all too often. I mean, I walk with a walker long distance, and I see people like at Disneyland. Oh, so that's how you get in the handicap line. You buy a walker, and, so stuff like that. Those are people that are total strangers. I'm never going to see them again, and I just blow it off. But I see people being hurt, and I have to think about not having a grudge. That's the one thing that's not automatic in my life. I have to process it.
Well, according to the Torah, you could speak up and say something like, that's a cruel remark.
Right. And I'm getting better at that at my
I hope you never have to
age.
be on a walker, you know, so.
Yeah, I'm getting better. I mean,
Good.
as far as speaking up, even to total strangers, but
Right.
never been my style before.
No. Anyone else? Thank you. Anyone else want to share what's speaking to them today? Which one of them is speaking to you today? None of them are speaking to you? Miriam?
Yeah.
I would say they all spoke to me. I naturally we prioritize that which is more important. I learned something. I always learn from you, always do. And I just learned from some of my fellow speakers, and I love to hear what they have to say. To re-emphasize to all of us because we all need it. And I learn, if I can, every day. Instead of getting to that person, venting, letting out our feelings, starting every single sentence with you did this and you did that and you didn't. We need to do what you say, Susan, quietly if we can. Are you aware? Blah, 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 blah.
Right.
That you made me use. Are you aware?
A lot of people are not aware.
They're not even aware, some of them, that they did it.
No,
They might not know what you're talking about, but if you come on accusingly, first sentence, you lost them. They immediately are defensive, even if what they did was absolutely wrong. You are making them defend it by how confrontational you are.
Right, that's why it says no guilt.
Can I add something to that, Suze? And that is, along with what Miriam said, I've had 2 instances recently where people said to me, just as Miriam said. And the thing is, if people talk to you that way, they really don't want to hear your side. They really don't want to know. And you're just wasting your time. So I just let them do it and just go on.
Right.
They don't want to hear my side.
Sometimes you can't, you just have to like move on. You're right, because there's no point. Anyone else have one of these holiness code commandments? Robert, yeah?
Yeah, I think the one that spoke to me when I was going through my conversion the most was the idea of, having one God. And I think I realized in life that whether it's sports, your favorite recreational activities, or in particular politics, if you don't put something in a superior position that's really solid, you're going to be taken by all of these false messiahs, whether they're other, and I'm talking in particular about the way we tend to occupy our time and find meaning in our lives, whether it's sports or music or food or and coming to today, I feel like one of the many reasons our country is so torn in half is that we've lost sight of some kind of a higher power. And in that place, we're choosing our political tribal identities and we're eating each other alive. And it's really horrifying, and it certainly sort of lays insult to the idea of trying to, when I thought it was interesting in the later statements that they said countrymen and not some other word. And I feel like we're kind of ignoring the fact that we're all tied together, whether we want to be or not, whether we agree, disagree, whether we're right or wrong. And it's really sad and horrifying to me that we can't have civil discourse and, dialogue and debate and come up for the best solutions we can under the circumstances.
Thank you. I agree. I'm sure a lot of people. Yes, Barbara.
I kind of like number 9 because the end of it seems to be a bit subtle, and I think it leaves you room for thought. It says, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edges of your field. And this is the part I really like, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. And I interpret it to mean that if you're fortunate enough to have material blessings, don't be greedy. Leave other people to glean it for you. Don't be greedy and try to take every penny in for yourself. Try to be generous with others. And I like that.
Don't buy all the toilet paper if there is.
Yeah.
My daughter just dropped off some wipes. It's very hard to get bacterial wipes, and she
Absolutely.
texted me and said, I was so excited, but I only took one for you and one for me. So, I didn't want to be greedy because everybody's looking for them. And she was like thinking, I'm going to leave some, I'm going to leave gleanings, I'm going to leave for others. So we can do it, this idea that, oh my God, I have to have all of it is from exactly what you're saying, Barbara. This idea of leaving some for others, leaving some behind. Anybody else have something that speaks to them from here?
I'm troubled about the defrauding, committing robbery, and stealing and dealing deceitfully. And part of that is our society. When I read in the paper of council people and people who are in government, people who are in business, and taking funds for themselves. It's every day in the paper, and it's a lot of them are stealing from the poor, and that's just charity work. I mean, when you read about that, we're heads of various charities that are taking money themselves. It's just indefensible,
What about these big corporations that are taking money allocated for the small businesses?
Yeah, there you go.
Things like that. Or these people who try to sell masks for millions to states, but they didn't have any masks.
Right. Yeah, that's what and they're taking advantage of this pandemic, this horrible situation. And then when our states are vying for medical supplies, and then they come up with companies and people who are defrauding them, it's just unbelievable. And then again, that also goes to the stumbling block and insulting the deaf, taking from others. That's what really bothers me very much.
It's amazing that this human nature doesn't change, fortunately. Anyone else? Yes, Talia.
So I didn't think this through this whole hour, but now it's really kind of glaring at me that the whole idea of one God is so important to me, because I find advertising to be this beautiful artistic thing, but also this making things into icons. So, people, kids be like, oh my God, I need that. Even if the family can't, there's just so many things with advertising and labels, and people that find power or prestige in saying, I went to Stanford or something like that. And that, but who is the person at the core? So there's that idea of one God and not idolatry. What's the word?
Idolatry.
Idolatry of things or people. So that's a big one for me today that I didn't think was a thing for me.
Turning things or prestige or labels into something we worship, exactly, or value. Anyone else? Anyone else? Roy, you don't want to talk?
No, I guess I'm in a quiet mood today, although I would sort of mirror someone who mentioned 9, but I would couple it with 10.
10.
And I think what appealed to me is it causes me to think of the other and not just myself.
Exactly.
That is, I think, the quality we all need more nowadays. So.
Also it says the poor and the stranger. And again, as I mentioned on Wednesday, if you were studying with me, remembering the stranger. I mean, it's just, I've never seen it in any other value system where we're so conscious of those not like ourselves. We should afford them dignity and respect and help and support. It's easy to take care of your own, but it's extraordinary, I think, to say, this is how you're holy. You take care of the others too. I am not for myself, but if I'm only for myself, what am I? As Hillel said. So there's this idea of holiness is not remote. It's not something just for the rabbis or the priests or the Dalai Lama. It's for all of us. So as I conclude, I just want to encourage you, and I know support you in your holy behavior as you go forth. And I hope you'll have a beautiful Shabbat. And it was lovely studying with you. And I hope to see you again soon. So Shabbat Shalom and be holy.
Shalom.
Thank you.
Shabbat